Welcome to another Ecoland TV interview. We're here today in the office of Nudge in Amsterdam, and we're talking with Polly Higgins, renowned barrister, author, and lead advocate for the Earth and Ecocide. Polly, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you very much. It's an absolute delight to be here.
For our audience out there who doesn't yet know the term ecocide, can you just give us a quick definition of what it means?
Sure. You know, in a way, it's unwanted harm. I've given it a legal definition: extensive damage, destruction to or loss of ecosystems of a given territory. And there are two types of ecocide here. There's human-caused ecocide, which is largely corporate ecocide. So we're talking about corporate crime, if you will. That unwanted harm that's caused as a result of dangerous industrial activity going in there, and as a consequence, it's causing mass damage and destruction. But there's also a second type of ecocide, which is equally important, and that is naturally occurring ecocide, whether or not it's through climate issues, rising sea levels, tsunamis, floods, typhoons, this sort of thing. And by creating a crime there, it's the failure for states, it's about state crime, the failure of the duty of care to give assistance to those who are at really the cutting edge of mass damage and destruction through climate issues.
Excellent. And so your work is working towards making ecocide law an internationally known advocacy, or can you tell us a little
crime? Yeah,
crime.
Yeah, that's right.
And so when this crime with the two types, how do you establish responsibility, for example?
Yeah, well, the starting point is when you put in place an international crime, it's rather like criminal law at a national level. So it's then at a national level for the governments of every state that's a signatory to the International Criminal Document, which is the Rome Statute, and that governs the International Criminal Court that's based here in The Hague. And what happens there is once it's put in place as an international crime, it becomes binding and it transposed into national law upon all those states that are signatories to the Rome Statute. So rather like theft or murder, for instance, that's a national crime, if you will. Right. Then legislation's put in place at a national level as well. So genocide is also a crime in this country. In fact, it's an international crime. And this is for ecocide to stand alongside genocide as an international crime.
Okay, so this would give lawyers something to fight against, or to put a name to it.
Well, in fact, it's more than that. What happens is it means that the state itself then has a legal duty of care for its citizens to ensure that ecocide doesn't play out. And so the state then brings the prosecutions on your behalf to protect its citizens from that significant harm. I'm thinking in particular, for instance, examples are, if you look at the cumulative impact of fracking, unconventional tar extraction, deforestation on a mass scale like the Amazon. These are all ecocides. And suddenly those countries that are being adversely impacted can and ought to, by law, then take prosecutions on your behalf as a citizen to prosecute those CEOs and directors of that company that are causing the crime.
So it seems clear that ecocide law is necessary. In your opinion, are we beyond the point of self-regulation? Is that kind of the reason why you think it's so necessary to make it a law?
You know, that's a very good question. Self-regulation works if your intent is aligned with the principle of what I call first do no harm. So it depends where your interests lie. If you wish to continue with business as usual, and it just so happens that your business results in significant damage, then obviously self-regulation is something that you'd be happy to give name to, but you probably won't pay any attention to, in the full knowledge that no one's going to come chasing you. So in a way, ecocide law is really for those companies and those states that are putting the interests of finance first, and finance without looking to the consequences of the harm. So I'm not anti-profit here, far from it. What I'm taking issue with is profit that arises out of significant harm.
Right.
So really this is about how it creates, instead of the self-regulation, which is voluntary, it creates a mandatory framework for those who aren't interested in getting there in a voluntary capacity.
Right.
So dirty energy then has to, by law, become clean energy, for instance.
Right. And I've heard you speak before about law in some forms created Ecocide, and now you talk about how it can undo it or save it in a way.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem we have is that a lot of our laws are premised on property and ownership. So we have a system whereby, putting the interests of the shareholder first and prioritizing profit is premised on who has the contract over that tract of land. Now, those indigenous communities, for instance, and I'm thinking here about the Athabasca tar sands, the indigenous communities have been there for hundreds of years before any company came along, but because the company can actually have a contract over that land and say, we now have ownership or permits, a license to operate there, your intrinsic rights to that land, because you don't have a piece of paper that says you own it,
Right.
our ownership trumps your trusteeship, if you will.
Right.
So you could say the scales of justice have become imbalanced through law, by law prioritizing property and ownership rights over trusteeship and guardianship.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, it goes one step further than that, because it's one thing to have ownership or having a contract over a tract of land, for instance, where you're carrying on your activities, but also if it's ownership without actually paying attention to what the subsequent consequences are. And this is what it is. Sometimes it can be unintended consequences.
Right.
Often with these companies, they don't sit there and say, hey, what are we going to destroy today? This isn't their driver. Their driver is profit. But it's profit without looking to the consequences. And actually law has created this problem because it is the law to put the interests of the shareholder first. And if the shareholder just wants profit, then actually it becomes a secondary consideration. And if that's going to damage your profit line to start doing something that causes less harm, then you're far less inclined to go that way.
Right. So with the current laws of the CEO or the people running the company needing to look out for the shareholders, that creates potentially a conflict of interest when they have to do things that jeopardize ecosystems.
That's exactly right. And indeed, if you look at it in terms of prioritizing, I can sit in a boardroom with the CEO or directors of an oil company, for instance, as their lawyer, and someone on the board says, hey, I don't feel too comfortable about our unconventional tar extraction, our fracking, our deep sea drilling, what have you. Maybe this is causing an ecocide, but ecocide is not in place as a law yet. And I, as the lawyer, would be saying, well, your number one legal duty is to put the interests of your shareholders first.
Right.
Your number one duty is to maximize profit. If you're going to get concerned about the environment, that's going to damage your bottom line. So we have an imbalance here where the prioritization through law is skewed towards the vested interests of profiteering. You can literally ask the question, whose interests are being protected here? People and planet, or the polluter, the destroyer? And what Ecocide law does is it flips that, literally flips it on its head. And once you have Ecocide law in place and you have the director saying, hey, I'm rather concerned here that this is going to cause an ecocide, I would say as a lawyer, yes, you're right. We have to look at that first and foremost, and if it is going to cause an ecocide, we can't go there. We will have to find innovation in the other direction. And hey, if you're an energy company, then clearly it's going to be the innovation in renewables, for instance, instead of something that causes significant harm.
So in a way, it's not just working against these big corporations. You're giving them an opportunity to fight for a changing world, for a new clean energy source.
This is exactly right. And more than that, it sets out a long-term investment signal right across the world. It's not dependent on 4-year cycles of governments coming and going where policy can change overnight. It becomes an international law, and therefore it applies pretty much across the board. Not entirely, but pretty much. Yeah. So
this is obviously a massive life project, a big shift for you, coming from London, a more traditional law practice there. What was your inspiration where you really said, oh, enough's enough, I need to dedicate my life to make Ecocide law and save the planet?
You know, I think it comes to us maybe 6 or 7 times in our life. I've heard it said before that we get critical choice points. Those moments in our lives where we can choose to take another path or just continue with our own business as usual, if you like. And for me, my critical choice point was when I was in court representing a man that had been very badly injured and harmed, unwanted harm that he'd suffered in the workplace, and I was representing him. It was the Court of Appeal in the Royal Courts of Justice in London, and it was back from the judges. And I found myself looking out of the windows, rather like here with all the trees outside, looking over buildings, and found myself thinking, it's not just my client that's suffering unwanted harm, so is the earth.
Right.
Something's got to be done about that.
Yeah.
And that thought changed my life. And I found myself thinking the earth is in need of a good lawyer.
Yeah, definitely.
And not just one.
No.
Well, many more are coming on board now,
Excellent.
which is really fantastic.
Excellent.
In different capacities as
Right,
well,
right.
which is great.
So you said we're not quite there yet in terms of making international law. Are we getting close? What's the latest? Where do we stand now?
Well, you know, I think this is really quite exciting times. This is really also about how each and every one of us is given that critical choice point. What do you do and just stand back and let business as usual continue? Or do you stand up and say, actually, I choose to be a trustee of the earth? And as a trustee of the earth, I see myself as a protector.
Right.
It's a David and Goliath epic story here that we have in our hands. The challenge is huge. But then, again, sometimes you have to find solutions that are equal to the task. And I think Ecocide law does match that.
Yeah.
So really what I'm doing is I'm inviting people to step up and speak out and help really see this as trustees,
Right.
earth protectors,
Yeah.
if you will.
So this helps you, so it's not so overwhelming. You bring it so the goal is so important that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Excellent.
And the more of us that come on board, you know, in a way it creates visibility as well, especially with social media today, taking this out there and showing and not being afraid, you know, to stand up and say, yeah, I am a trustee of this earth and I choose to support Ecocide law and those who want to take it forward.
Right.
And I think this is very important because those states who actually really require Ecocide law the most are the small island developing states, the ones that are looking at the naturally occurring ecocide, the rising sea levels, the ones that require, you know what, those guys, they can't even afford to get over here to come to The Hague to propose this as an international crime, because unlike us where we can get on EasyJet, you know, they have to take flights through a couple of continents and send delegates and have top representation, training up of lawyers for this, you know, but we could help assist and make that happen. I really think that actually this is about citizen empowerment. Yeah, it's a David and Goliath story, but each and every single one of us can be that David, if you will.
Right.
And this has never really been done before, where citizens can actually decide the outcome for the earth and support a law. And really this is about innovative approach to how we the people, choose the laws that we want to put in place.
Uniting people, including the little people, and making it accessible so everyone can have the right to peace. And
we all have a role in this, and actually I see us all as equal in all of this. It doesn't matter whether or not you're a head of state or whether or not you're a grassroots activist. We can all be empowered to help make this happen.
Yeah, I agree. So in your book, The Earth is Our Business, you talk a lot about the new form of leadership, which places health and the well-being of people and planet first.
Yeah.
That's kind of looking forward to new leadership. You're working with Nudge for their campaign. You're a keynote speaker for the Global Leadership Challenge.
Yeah.
That's a development program for young leaders in sustainability. What is your main message to the young future leaders of the world? What can really motivate them?
You know, I think there's something really exciting happening here. For some people they say this is ridiculous, it's impossible, it would never happen. But you know what? The impossible always becomes possible. You know, they said it was impossible that slavery would be abolished. Well, we made that a crime. They said it would be impossible that genocide would ever become a crime, but it did. Apartheid became a crime. And now it's time for ecocide to become a crime. And you look at what's happening to the world and you say, that is a crime. That is unwanted harm. It's time that we as citizens stood up and spoke out on behalf of those who don't have those laws in place, don't have that form of support and protection. So this is really exciting, and it's also really exciting because I think it's about how we take law forward in very innovative ways, but also how we combine that with innovative technology. I mean, you know, the access to social media now is huge, and we've got so much more coming forward now. It's so exciting what's happening with blockchain technology, for instance, open sourcing. You know, there's a whole new lexicon, a new language with Bitcoin and alternative currencies. There's a lot that we can do here. I mean, Robin Hood, it's a kind of Robin Hood scenario, if you like.
Right.
You know, here we are, we're in a privileged position. You know, we're the wealthy nations, if you like. Well, you know what? We can gift our funds to help those who actually really require the funds to put this law in place.
Right.
And that's precisely what Robin Hood did.
Yeah.
Rob the rich to help the poor.
Yeah.
Maybe we should start doing that
Yes.
too. Legally, of course.
And motivate our young future leaders to be the Robin Hoods and
Yes.
and use the tools of technology to make social change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's exciting.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I think so.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thank
we look
you.
forward to checking in with your work with Nudge.
Yeah.
Look forward to seeing your motivational speech there.
Thank you.
And for our viewers who want to keep track of you, where can they find some more?
If you go to eradicatingecocide.com and put your email in there, come and join us and become a trustee for the planet Earth, become an Earth protector.
Definitely. Thank you so much for your dedication and work, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you.